Elidor by Garner. 6. The Lay of the Starved Fool. "But how did we come through from the church to the castle?" said David. The children sat by Maelbron on the ridge, clear of the hill. The dolmen arch was drab with lichen, and the stones of the avenue healed like twisted palings. Clouds still rolled upon the plain, but there was a quickening in the air, and Phindius, Phalius, and Murius were etched in gold, as though they stood before the dawn. "It was not easy to cross from your world into this," said Maelbron, "but there are places where they touch the church and the castle. They were battered by war, and now all the land around quakes with destruction. They have been shaken loose in their worlds." "But the fiddler and the noise, what was that?" said Roland. "All things have their note and will answer to it." "You mean like wine-glass ringing?" "Yes," said Maelbron. "And when the church answered, it existed in both places at once, the real church and the echo of itself. Yet more than echo, for although you opened the door here, no door opened in your world."
"Can you always do this?" said Helen.
"No, the finding is chance. Wasteland and boundaries, places that are neither one thing nor the other, neither here nor there. These are the gates of Elidor."
"Isn't it funny how things happen?" said Roland. "You know, if we hadn't gone into Manchester today, and if we hadn't played that game with the map, and if the demolition gang hadn't had a tea break, all those little things happening just at the right time, all ending like this."
The children looked at the 4 treasures, sword, stone, spear, and cauldron glowing in their hands. "One each," said David. "Yes," said Maelbron, and he took the fiddle and bow from under his cloak. They were slung on a cord across his shoulder, and there was also a pouch fastened to the cord. He opened it, and took out an oblong package and began to unwrap layer after layer of very thin oiled cloth. He smoothed each layer and put it aside before peeling off the next. It was an old book made of vellum. The leaves were hard, glossy, and crippled with age. Maelbron opened the book and held it out for the children to see. Nothing that had yet happened to Roland compared with the shock of this moment. He was looking at a page of script written in a language that was unknown to him. And at the top of the page was a picture of himself, with Helen, Nicholas, and David by his side. The figures were stiff and puppet-like, and everything was out of scale, but there was no mistaking them. They stood close together, cradling the treasures in their arms, their heads tilted to one side, a blank expression on their faces, their toes pointing downwards. Next to them was a round hill with a dolmen on its side, and by another figure, smaller than the children, Maelbron, his arms spread wide, and he held the fiddle in one hand and the bow in the other.
"We've even got the right treasures," said Roland,
for in the picture he had a spear, and David the sword, Helen the cauldron, Nicholas the stone. Maelbron put his finger on the script and read, "And they shall come from the waves, and the glory of Elidor shall pass with them, and the darkness shall not fade, unless there is heard the song of Findhorn, who walks in the high places."
"But who wrote it?" said David, "and how did he know?"
"This book was written so long ago," said Maelbron, "that we have only legend to tell us about it. The legend says there was once a ploughboy in Elidor, an idiot given to fits, but in his fit he spoke clearly and was thought to prophecy. And he became so famous that he was taken into the king's household, where he swore that he would starve among plenty, and so it happened, for he was locked in a pantry and died there. However it was, his prophecies were written in this book, which is called The Lay of the Starved Fool. Through the years, it has been read only for its nonsense. But when the prophecies started to be fulfilled, when the first darkness crept into Elidor, I saw in the Lay of the Starved Fool not nonsense, but the confused fragments of a dream that no sane man could bear to dream, a waking memory of what was to be. Since then I have worked to discover the truth hidden in the lay, because, you see, I know nothing of what I have just told you about our two worlds. I have had to find that out for myself. I knew nothing of what I have just told you of our two worlds. I have had to find that out for myself by trial and thought, by asking all the time, how is this true? And if it is true, how can it be? Do you understand, then, what it was to find the note that made the church answer, to watch Phineas dissolve, to step through into your world, and to see you, whom I have known for so long, running toward me across the broken land? It's as if everything that's ever happened was leading up to...
It's as if everything that's ever happened was leading up to this, said Roland. You can't say how far back it started, everything working together like cogwheels. When I spun the street names, they had to stop at that one place. That had been the moment when he had felt he was being watched. Remember, I have said, the worlds are linked, said Maelbron, and what you have done here will be reflected in some way, at some time in your world.
Wait a minute, said Roland. Will you read us that bit out of the book again?
And they shall come from the waves, and the glory of Elidor shall pass with them, and the darkness shall not fade, unless there is heard the song of Findhorn, who walks in the high places.
We've been going on as though we've saved Elidor, said and now that you've found the treasure, you'll be all right, said Roland. But doesn't that mean that things will be worse, not better?
It does, said Maelbron. We are not at the end, but at the beginning. But with the treasures we may hold Gorius, and from there win back the other castles. Then we shall have 4 islands in the darkness, and some of us may yet see Montram Green.
But who's Findhorn?
said Roland. No one knows, said Maelbron. There are desolate mountains far in the north, the edge of the world, where in the old days it was thought that demons lived. I think these are the high places, but Findhorn and the song are forgotten. And now that the treasures are safe, I can go to look for him there. I have proved the wisdom of the starved fool now, and that gives me courage to prove it once again. They climbed down from the ridge into Mondrum and made their way back toward Phineas through the slime. The journey seemed much shorter to Roland than when he had been alone. Or perhaps it was because Maelbron knew where he was going and led them straight there. The treasures surrounded them in a field of color, which moved with them, so that as they came to a tree, it would change from gray to purple to the livid colors of decay, and then sink back into the dead light when they had passed by. They saw nothing of Phineas until they reached the open ground below the forest, 1/2 a mile from the castle, and at this distance the golden outline did not show, but the ruins were clear in detail, as though the children and Maelbron were looking at them through a hole in a dirty window pane. When they were nearly at the drawbridge, Roland turned for a last sight of Elidor.
Maelbron, something's happened on the ridge.
They could just see the ridge above the trees, and the squat cone of Vandway, with the avenue leading from it. The standing stones of the avenue, which they had left in disorder, were now upright, sharp, harsh, and menacing. And as they watched, a dark beam of like a black searchlight leapt from the mound. "Run!" shouted Maelbron. "I have been too proud, and Vandray has recovered from its wound." The beam circled, sweeping land and sky, and before the children reached the drawbridge, it caught them and locked onto them beyond escape. The air was thick as water. It dragged about their limbs and clogged their lungs, and was shot through with strands of blackness, which their hands could not feel or push aside, but each strand plucked at their minds like wire as they blundered through. "Think of suns, meadows, and bright flowers. Do not let night into your minds." Maelbron walked beside the children, driving them on. He moved freely, untouched by the dark. "Your strength is your weakness now. Vandway has sent fear to be given shape by you. These shapes will be real as the door was real. Keep them out." But the fear was in the children, a numbness that sapped the will, and soon they began to hear in the forest the pursuit that they themselves were making. Slowly they crossed the bridge, but those few yards were longer than the whole journey. The children's vision was so blighted by the strands that they saw the bridge shoot out like a pier over the sea, and the castle was a speck where the lines of the planks converged in the distance. The bridge became higher and narrower, and then it was tilted to the left, and then to the right, and then upwards, so that they could not walk, and then down, so that they were on a wooden precipice, and dared not move, and then the bridge swung completely over, and they felt that they would drop off into the sky, and all the time Maelbron fought for their minds. "The bridge is safe. You will not stop. Think. Move." They reached the gatehouse, and as they labored through the courtyard, there bounded from the forest something that was on 2 legs, but was not a man, and behind it the trees ran howling. The children fell into the courtyard, and the grip of Vandway slackened. "Take the treasures," said Maelbron. "No, you need them." "We are trapped. Take them to your world and guard them there. They will be safe, and while they are free, their light will not die in Elidor, and we may live." "Come with us," said Helen. "I cannot. I must seal the gate. Nothing must follow you through the keep. Stand well clear on the other side." "What shall we do with the treasures?" said Roland. "No more than guard them. And if we fail here, the light of Elidor may live on and kindle again in other worlds." Maelbron put the fiddle to his shoulder and began to play, faster and faster, until the notes merged and drove through the children, cutting the darkness from their minds, snapping the threads of Vandway with the pain. The keep picked up the fiddle's note, and the surface of the stones lost its hardness, rippled like skin. "Now go!" cried Maelbron. "Go!" The ramparts by the gatehouse bristled with silhouettes. "Maelbron, go!" The children staggered through the doorway of the keep. The ground shook so much that they could hardly stand. Their teeth burred in their heads. The walls were a fog of sound. Plaster came like snow from the ceiling. A gap appeared in front of them, and they pulled and pushed each other towards it, and between 2 floorboards that were nailed across the gap, and ran, choking out onto the wasteland of Thursday Street. The fiddle note held. Each brick in the derelict church was grinding against the next. Mortar dust spouted from the joints. "Look out!" Nicholas yelled. "It's going!" All the sound rose together in one unbearable pitch. The wall bellied outward. The church fell in a groaning roar of destruction. "Roland, the treasures! What's happened to them?" But Roland was gazing at the tangled ruin of the church and could not answer. "It's all right," he said at last. "It's all right. We'll be able to hide them now." The children stood before the rubble as the dust cleared. It was late afternoon. A long way off, a woman pushed a pram. In his hand, Roland held a length of iron railing. Nicholas, a keystone from the church. David had 2 splintered laths nailed together for a sword, and Helen an old cracked cup with a beaded pattern molded on the rim. And that's the end of chapter 6.